At the time, all discipline seems a cause not for joy, but for pain. And yet later it brings peaceful fruit of righteousness to those who are trained by it. So strengthen your drooping hands and your weak knees. Make straight paths for your feet, that what is lame may not be disjointed, but healed. From our second reading today, the letter to the Hebrews. But if any of you have ever had to go through physical therapy, especially after a surgery or something, or know someone who has had to go through physical therapy, you know that it's a painful process, or it certainly can be. I was talking to a gentleman at a care center, and he was telling me that he was going through physical therapy, through PT. And he says, you know what PT stands for, right? Pain and torture. That's certainly a painful process that we have to go through at times. I know patients at hospitals who very much grumble at their nurses and caretakers for pushing them through to do these painful things. So why do we put ourselves through them? Well, of course we know that we have to go through that physical therapy in order to strengthen our muscles again, to get them back in working order, to be healed and to function in the way that they're supposed to, so we can go back to normal living. In a way, the Christian religion is sort of like our physical therapy, our spiritual physical therapy. That in our religion, in Christianity, we have these disciplines, these teachings that Christ gives us in and through the church, these disciplines and practices that we do that, while hard and painful at times, as I talked about last week, sometimes it's hard and painful to live into everything that Christ and His church teaches. It's all to make us stronger, to strengthen our hearts and souls, to live into the normal that God intends for us. See, the problem is we live in a broken and fallen world. That what we consider normal in our normal living is not the normal that God intends for us. If everyone in the town drove around with half-inflated tires in their car, everyone would consider that normal, because that's what everybody does. Until someone came driving through town with fully inflated tires, properly inflated tires. And they would say, hey, this works pretty well, that this is the normal that's intended for these tires, for our cars. So God's level of normal that He wants to bring us to is something more. So that we need to be strengthened to enter into heaven. There's an image I love in a book I've referenced before, one of my favorites, The Great Divorce by C.S. Lewis. And in this, these people go on a day trip, a bus trip, to the outskirts of heaven. But when they get to the outskirts of heaven, the book talks about the heaven is so starkly real that they in comparison are but half-faded ghosts, phantoms, a smudge on the scenery. And that they say heaven is so real that they don't even have an impact, that they try and pick up a leaf and they can't pick it up. The blades of grass are so sharp they cut into their feet, and it's painful. And as they confront their vices that they have to overcome, they talk about, in overcoming them, that they have to become more solid, become more real, to be able to enter into heaven, to the full reality of heaven, to be firmed up. And so everything that the church gives us is to help us to do that, to become, if you will, more solid and more firm in soul, to become more real so that we can enter into the full reality of heaven, to be purged or purified. That's where the term purgatory comes from, whether in this life or the next, of whatever keeps us from living into that fullness. So everything, the disciplines of the church that they give us are like that spiritual, physical therapy to strengthen us into that. Whatever it is, the liturgy, the rituals, the gestures, the actions of liturgy. Kneeling, genuflecting before the tabernacle, making the sign of the cross, using tangible things to remind us of those things. The practices of prayer, practices of fasting, abstaining from meat on Fridays during Lent, giving up, doing penances during Lent, doing the works of mercy, acts of charity and service, caring for the poor and the vulnerable or those who are suffering among us. And the devotions that the church gives us, the rosary, the Stations of the Cross, novenas, and many, many more. All these practices at times can seem like strange or silly things, or things we don't fully understand, or hard and difficult things, are all to strengthen us, to make us something more, to form us into something. When I was in seminary, as seminarians, we have to pray this thing called the Liturgy of the Hours. Seminarians and priests. Priests make a promise to pray this. But it's a collection of psalms that we pray essentially throughout the day, at different parts throughout the day. But for the first many years of seminary, well, of course I did it, but I only did it because I had to. And many times it was a slog getting through all the psalms that I had to pray each day. And I'd sit down to pray, and I'd be having a great day, and things were going great, and then we'd have one of these lamenting psalms that's like, Lord, life is miserable. My one companion is darkness. That sure put a damper on my day. Or there's this really long one from the book of Daniel that's a part of those prayers, where he says, sun and moon, bless the Lord. Stars of heaven, bless the Lord. Seas and rain, and goes through pretty much everything in all creation. Bless the Lord. And pretty soon I figured it's a lot faster just to say everything on this page, bless the Lord. Everything on this page, bless the Lord. But the priest at the seminary didn't like it when we did that so much. But it was through praying this over and over, while I didn't always enjoy it, that especially into my priesthood, I began to realize how praying through this prayer practice, day in and day out, week after week, year after year, began to shape me, form me, being immersed in this prayer book of the Bible, the book of Psalms, and other scriptures that are part of that. That it began to form how I pray, how I understood who God is. That I realized it began to give me a deeper relationship with Him, that it began to give me a deeper language of how to pray to God, of praise and worship, but also crying out to Him in need and lamenting. And that I realized that sometimes I'd get to these lamenting psalms, and even though I didn't feel that way, I knew that someone in the world did. This cry out of desperation. And so it began to expand my prayer as well, that my prayer wasn't just about me, but about praying for others on behalf of the world, offering these prayers for more than just me. And so it began to expand my heart into more deeply being able to love God and love of neighbor. But I wouldn't have come to that if it wasn't for the day in and daily grind of praying those over and over, of doing this discipline that the church has passed down through the centuries. And of course, in all of this, all these works, it's not about working our way to heaven, but it's in all these things and everything the church gives us, the Mass, the sacraments, the liturgies, the devotions, doing acts of service and charity. It's because Christ's grace is operative in all of this. It's only by grace we are saved. But it's in doing these things that channel His grace to us. That we, in doing these things, open ourselves up to receive the grace that He wants to shape us with. To form us and transform us. To strengthen us, our hearts and souls, to make us more greatly souled, magnanimous. To solid and firm up our hearts and souls, to become something more. To live into the normal that God intends for us, not the normal we experience in the world. And it's all by his love and grace that he calls us into this. So at the time, all discipline seems a cause not for joy, but for pain. And yet later, it brings peaceful fruit of righteousness to those who are trained by it. So strengthen your drooping hands and your weak knees. Make straight paths for your feet, that what is lame may not be disjointed, but healed.